Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome to So You Want to Be a GC. My name's Shep Davidson. I'm one of the partners at Burns and Levinson. I'm also the publisher of the In-House Advisor blog, which is a blog geared towards in-house counsel, and also C-suite to provide sort of practical legal and business advice for in-house people. I'm really excited to moderate this panel today. So just to show you how excited I am, it's not just, you don't just get the top of the suit today. You actually I've got the pants on all the way down, even the shoes. And if you get really close, I've got cologne on. So that's how excited I am about this panel. Let me just tell you how this is going to work. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to go through some topics and questions with the panel, and you're going to get to hear their views on all sorts of different issues. At around 12:45, each of the panelists will give a short, just call it a closing statement, sort of giving you their key takeaways from all of this. And then we'll take questions. There's a little button down at the bottom. We'd prefer use the Q&A button. If you have a question and put it in there, we'll try to get to it at the end. If we don't, we'll try to get responses out to you afterwards. So with that, let me introduce our panelists in no particular order. First is Betty Francisco. Betty's an entrepreneur, a business executive, community leader, angel investor, and most importantly for this webinar, a recovering general counsel. Betty, I first met Betty when she became general counsel of, I believe the name was Millennium Partner Sports Club Management, which you people might know as the Sports Club LA. She did that for 8 years, and then after that, she was general counsel for 3 years at Compass Working Capital, which is a nonprofit organization that provides incentive-based savings and financial coaching programs. Fun fact that you don't know about Betty is for the week of March 11th to the 18th, 2001, she was the limbo champion at the Club Med in Cabo. Okay. Next panelist, we have Dave.
Where'd you get that?
Deep research. Next panelist is Dave Mason. Dave has been the general counsel of EverQuote since 2014. For those of you that don't know EverQuote, it operates an online insurance marketplace connecting consumers with insurance providers. Prior to that, Dave was deputy general counsel at Kayak Software, travel website. Dave started his career at Bingham McCutcheon, which now is Morgan Lewis. And Dave's also an adjunct professor at Boston College Law School, and he's done that since 2006. Fun fact about Dave, he actually auditioned for Ball Boy #2 for season 3 of Ted Lasso, but he didn't get past the first round of interviews, unfortunately, for Dave. And last, but certainly not least, Kathleen Patton. Kathleen is general counsel at Jobcase, which is a social media platform dedicated to empowering and advocating for the world's workers. She's only been there for about 4 months now, I think, Kathleen.
Yeah, not quite.
And prior to that, Kathleen was general counsel at Car Gurus. And before that, she was general counsel at Demandware, which is a Salesforce company. Kathleen is also very important for you guys out there, a board member of the Northeast chapter of the Association of Corporate Counsel. So she's real important. Fun fact about Kathleen, she at one time was in the Guinness Book of World Records as the fastest ever Irish step dancer, having completed 271 steps in a minute. So that's our panel right now. So they're diverse and they're fabulous. So let's get right into it. Our first topic, the category is being sort of a legal counselor and business advisor. And we're going to start by random drawing with Betty. All in-house counsel give legal and business advice to the company. How do you see the role of being a legal counselor and business advisor for the general counsel as opposed to somebody who's just corporate counsel or associate general counsel?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in both of my roles as GC, I was the sole lawyer in the organization. So I don't even know how to compare, because I didn't have a whole team. I had you as external advisor, Shep, right, to guide me on areas that I didn't know a lot about. But what I would say is, as GC, your focus is on the entire organization and serving as an advisor to both the CEO and the board. right? That to me, that's always how I viewed the client. It's the organization. My duty is to the organization, and to our board of directors. I think when you are in a more defined role, right, maybe as associate general counsel, or you are legal counsel, corporate counsel, whatever term you use, for a business line or a particular, in large corporate departments, you might be in litigation, you might be in employment law, you might be in acquisitions. You're in a much more defined role, and you may not have ever see or have to deal with the overall larger, bigger picture, right? Around where's the business headed? How does the legal function align with overall business strategy? Being almost like a fortune teller of what's coming down the pike, right? That this company or organization should be caring about. And I'll give you one example. When I was at Millennium at Sports Hub LA, things that I had to foresee is that you have to have a pulse on the ground, because are employees potentially unionizing? Are they looking to unionize? How do you get ahead of that or not, right? How that these are telltale signs, like having your pulse on the ground as to what's happening in the organization. Another, around that time, DEI, right, diversity, equity, and inclusion was a big thing. You had, we had a very diverse workforce, and on occasion, people would say, like, you can't speak another language here. so it's like being a step ahead, knowing what's happening, knowing what's coming, both from a legal regulation perspective, but also what's happening in the larger business ecosystem, so that you could be a good advisor to your company and make sure it's positioned for success in light of the competitive landscape. So I often thought of myself as, I was on the management team, reported to the CEO, but thought of myself almost like an owner of the business, right? So how should I care about this? And then I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I think always the perception of in-house counsel, legal counsel, is you're the person that says no to stuff. And I wanted to be perceived as someone that was so entrenched with the mission of the business, and so aligned with that I was someone you came to for advice, to make sure that what you wanted to do from a business perspective could even be better, right? So not the naysayer, but rather, let me open up the door to how you could think about this even more broadly and bigger. So
Right.
I'll stop there. I'd love some my colleagues to chime in there, but I really did have a business perspective, like probably never wanted to use legal or regulation as a way to say, no, you can't do that, but rather, how can you do this in light of the regulatory landscape?
So Kathleen, Dave, perspective on advising, your clients as the general counsel, as opposed to, somebody lower in the food chain.
Yeah, just thinking back on, my career, when I didn't wear the GC hat, and when I, do wear the GC hat now, and thinking of the members that are also on my team, I think Betty makes some great points. I think I feel this pretty much the same. I generally think that, general counsel, deputy general counsel, associate corporate counsel, whatever titles you have out there, that all the time everyone should have that mindset of what's right and what's best for the business. And you may be looking at a small contract negotiation, business partnership deal, but certainly in the back of your mind, everyone, I think, should be thinking, what does this mean for the organization as a whole? Are there other potential footfalls, conflicts, areas that we should be concerned about other than just this one deal? And I think the only time that really changes is, as Betty suggested, when you have the subject matter experts. I think maybe in parts of my career, or maybe I was wearing a corporate capital markets securities hat, you're very much focused and drilled in on just what are the SEC rules for a particular filing or something like that. But, aside that, or, employment, whatever it may be, generally, I think at any level, you should always have the broader business in mind.
I was thinking as Betty was talking, and Dave as well, about the word general in our title, right? And I think you can interpret it two ways: as general, like I need to know a little bit about everything, like I need to weigh in on things that I'm no expert on, around HR, or things on the IP side maybe, or a technology issue. So I have to have that broad perspective. But I'm also a general. So when I walk into that room, the war room, with the other generals at the end of the day, and we have to make a decision, like I'm the one who's accountable for that decision. So I have to really be thoughtful about the business as well. I can have given my legal advice, but then when I walk into that room and we're making a decision at the, how are we going to proceed? I'm in the capacity of a general, but I'm overseeing the whole army, or in this case, the whole business, if you will, as Betty was saying, right? I've got to really take a practical business view. So I like to think of both meanings of the word general. I'm a generalist, but I'm also a general in terms of leadership.
So next question, just for you, Dave. So when you're asked for your input on a legal matter, there are essentially sort of three kinds of responses you can give, and variations in between. But there's, okay, here are the risks. What do you want to do? Here are the risks. My advice is do X. Or here are the risks, and you have to do X. Okay. Are there certain situations where you typically use one of those approaches as opposed to another? And does it matter who's asking you for the input in terms of which approach you might use, or the situation?
Probably shouldn't matter who's asking, but at the end of the day, I'm sure it does. And just managing, personalities and work styles that you begin to get familiar with over the years, whether that translates from, seniority or just, individual characteristics. I think of the three you mentioned, it was, kind of all, here are the risks, and, what do you want to do? Here's my advice, or you have to do. I think the third one of those, the have to do, that's pretty rare. That's like the, if you get that wrong, you go to jail type thing. So you don't see those, very often. It seems that, in my role, and what I do, and kind of my career, it's always a lot of gray, space, and it's more, kind of where are you going to fall on the spectrum and the risk profile. I've mostly worked with startups, so it's a lot about managing risk and kind of accepting risk is part of growing a business. Rarely is it you absolutely have to do it this way, but when that's the case, that's just what it is. In terms of then what do you want to do, and here's my advice. I'm full of opinions. I feel like including about subjects of which I have no knowledge whatsoever. But I think part of my job is to give advice. I'm opinionated. I've been part of this, the business that I'm at now for 8+ years. I got a career in business and working in law and accounting before that. So I definitely have opinions. I know a lot about the business. I think part of the value that any good attorney brings to the table, especially on the in-house side, is to share views and give advice. That's what people largely are looking for, in my mind. And when it comes down to here are the risks, and just leaving in the open-ended question, what do you want to do? I think that's a little more reserved. If I'm working with someone that I know appreciates the maybe a little more sophisticated and understands and appreciates the context, and they don't really kind of need my advice. It really is just hey, there's A, B, and C. Which one do you want to do? And that they fully understand A, B, and C, and it's their call to make. So it's a pretty subjective answer, I guess. I'm not sure that drills into it enough for you, Shep, but I think 1 and 2, definitely I probably lean towards 2 more than anything, and 3, see the least.
Betty, Kathleen, how about you guys? How do you, tend to couch your advice to the business people? Are you trying to, get them to do something, or are you sitting back and just, going to support them in a decision?
I mean, similar to what Dave said, when it's something about generating revenue, I tend to ask the question, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want to do? And then try to figure out a way to help them address that. If it's something that, could end in litigation, or something that could end in a licensing issue that I need to address, that's when I'll generally say, hey, let's work together to figure this out. As Dave said, rarely are you in the situation where you say you can't do that, right? Antitrust, insider trading, a couple of other things when I say stop, can't do that. But most of the time it's, let's figure out what we're both trying to accomplish. Sometimes when you reframe the question that way to folks, you'll hear something that you wouldn't have heard otherwise. So I do think it's important to ask them, what are you trying to accomplish? But as I'm always giving advice to, I'm the same, right? You ask me for my opinion, I'm going to give it. And I think some people see that advice is, oh, that's the legal decision, and it's no, that's advice. So be careful how you position it. If it's just, you ask me for my opinion, here's my opinion, versus here's some legal advice and here's what I would do. So just be careful about that. I think sometimes people misinterpret what we say as the Bible, or, something that can't be changed.
So let's go to a little different topic. Talk about mentoring and internal relationships. So in law firms, we talk a lot about mentoring. So let me ask you, Kathleen, did you have a mentor or mentors that, particularly fostered your desire to become a general counsel, or gain the skills that helped you become a general counsel? And if so, what did that person tell you that maybe you still use today, or that has an lasting impact on you?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing I'll say is your mentor doesn't always wear a t-shirt that says I'm your mentor. Sometimes you realize along the way, wait a minute, that person is advancing my career. So let me listen to what they have to say. So that's the first thing I'll say. I had a mentor who wasn't on the legal track, who sort of a, crotchety person who I realized along the way, wait a minute, he's trying to help me out here. I should let him help me and take advantage of that, even though he's not the person I would identify as my mentor. So step back. If somebody's trying to help your career, you take advantage of that. So I did have a mentor. My first in-house job, a woman who was actually a law school classmate of mine was a general counsel. So turned out, she and I are contemporaries, but she turned out being one of the biggest advocates for my career and mentor to me. Some of the things you asked, like, what did I learn from her, is that you have to be willing to make a judgment call on things where, it's on the one hand, on the other hand, on the third hand, you have to be willing to say, on the one hand, on the other hand, on the third hand, and here's where I'm going, here's my advice. So you have to be a little bit brave in that regard to weigh all the decisions and ultimately take a position and be brave with that. And then you don't have to necessarily stand by it, but you need to have some conviction in what it is that you're advising on. So if you say, hey, I think this, and then somebody says, but that, you can change your views, but you should have some conviction about where you land with your decisions and your business judgment. So thank you, Sheila.
Yeah. Betty, how about you? Mentors in your career that you can comment on?
I mean, I've had a lot of, I think, informal mentors. Some of them don't even know they were mentors to me. As far as encouraging me to become a GC, I honestly, I think I fell upon the first opportunity to go to Millennium was about the role was open for a general counsel for Sports Club LA, and that is where I worked out. And that was like my oasis. So to me, that was the dream job, right? I could work out, I could be in a beautiful place. It's, I'll learn a lot about the fitness industry, which I was super interested in. And it wasn't anyone in legal that prepared me for that. It was actually the CEO and the COO, right? That taught me the industry. And that's what, the deep understanding of the business you're working for is so important. The better you know it, the better you know the product or the service, the better advisor you can be. but also understanding the industry that you're in is really, really important too. And I will say I found mentors in that space, less so. I think the lawyers, where I got, I think, emotional support was from my legal friends, right? So when you're first in that role, you're like, who do I turn to? I'm a solo GC. I need support. I've never done this before. And I was young, I felt like I was still pretty young. I was only in my 8th year. Like I practiced, in a firm for 8 years, and I went straight to this company and, was like, I've had that imposter syndrome a bit, and so I had to surround myself with people that were smarter so that I could be effective in the role. But yeah, always felt like I had the people I sought advice from were mentors. And then I flipped it too, right? Where someone may have thought I was mentoring them, but I viewed them as mentors as well. I will also say, because Kathleen, you're on the board of ACC. ACC is an amazing resource. I joined the board too, and I found that the community of lawyers, right, the ability to just, even if they're your peers, the ability to vet things with that group was amazing. And then Shep, your group, also the GC group, which you developed later when I was at Compass, also an amazing place to get peer support. And, a lot of those are mentors as well. So I would say find mentorship and championing throughout, right, different networks.
So Dave, let's talk about developing personal relationships sort of inside the company. So that's obviously important for the success of any attorney. How is it different for the GC in terms of how you develop relationships and with whom you have to develop relationships in order to succeed as a GC?
I think it's important to develop just good relationships with kind of everyone in the organization, top to bottom. I mean, these are the folks you spend a lot of time with day in and day out. Where is it, maybe a little different for the GC in particular is it's certainly, probably more focused on, the senior leadership team, and the senior leaders in the organization. Those are the ones that, you're really trying to make sure that they, view your, opinions, viewpoints, and as having the right amount of weight that it should, and fostering those relationships. So, when I give feedback on something, it's not discounted. It's taken, for what it is, and that, I'm weighing in on a viewpoint, and that means, hey, it must be true. It's coming from Dave. So they rely on my advice, and over the years come to find it is consistent with supporting the business and our plans for growth. The other area probably changes a little bit, because I would, the folks on my team do that as well. Maybe the one area that it really starts to get a little different is fostering relationships with the board. I do spend a fair amount of time, interacting with the board meetings, with the board at our meetings, but then also outside as well. And I, try and make sure that, I have great lines of communication with each of the board members individually, so they know that they can always reach out to me if they have any questions or concerns or things that they want to discuss, and that there is an open line of communication, and we have just a great, strong, working relationship, where the same thing, they know that they can come to me and get, great, trustworthy advice.
How do you do that with the board, particularly, outside board members, because you're not seeing them or interacting with them on as regular a basis? So how do you do that? I mean, do you go to the Red Sox game with them? I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Any opportunity there is to kind of, grow and foster that, whether it's in a social setting, I will do that. I have, a couple of members of the board that I play golf with. I got one member of the board, she's a sports fanatic, and one of the benefits of being in-house counsel is, the firms always have tickets to something. So there's a great one, that to invite, the board member to that. So social settings are a great opportunity, but it doesn't need to be that. It can also just be, hey, we have this upcoming meeting, sending off an email saying, let's hop on a call for a few minutes, and just saying, hey, any questions? The materials went out. Is there anything you'd like to discuss? Just wanted to touch base. If it's something that says, hey, I think that this would be a good thing to update a couple of board members on because they take an interest in it. Give them a call, shoot them an email, and say, let's connect for a few minutes. So I think it runs both, just making sure you take advantage of the opportunities to have those touch points to connect with them, and then if there's opportunities on kind of like the social circle side, do that as well. We try and arrange. It's obviously been harder with COVID, but after the board meetings, folks want to grab dinner, drinks, or just socialize for a little bit. We try and build in, time for that as well, just to help develop those relationships, with the kind of leadership team and even layers down as well.
Betty, Kathleen, any comments that you guys have on the relationship building you do as a general counsel that maybe is a little bit different than as corporate counsel?
I mean, the one area where at Compass most recently, it's a nonprofit, right? So different from a for-profit, but we were building the board. And so I led some of the work on the governance committee, right? So putting in place some practices around here's how you might cultivate, new board members, here's how we want to track that, and then using the board for their best, feedback on how to do that effectively, because we were leading that internally. So it was a way to show leadership with the board, even though I was in-house, and to get to know them and just really cultivating their brain trust, right, and their knowledge in that context. So I think to the extent that, some of the committee work can sometimes be a place to do that, to get to know people in a much more deeper way is good. And then there's no replacement for relationship building when you're breaking bread or when you're doing an activity, right? So the more that you could do that as part of the leadership team or management team with board members, the better. It just makes it a more effective, board and management relationship.
And since this session is oriented towards folks who are not in GC roles, I will say if you're considering a GC role or trying to be promoted within your organization, it is good to understand the board dynamics. And maybe that means that you get invited to a committee meeting to talk about a litigation matter, the audit committee, or you go to the comp committee meeting to talk about the new executive comp plan, or you if you have a corporate governance committee, nom-gov committee, you go to, so I would encourage you diplomatically, because people are sensitive about the board, and rightly so, if you have the opportunity to find ways to attend a board meeting or to get to know one or more board members. So you may be the person who emails the board to share board materials and just start to build that relationship. It's just, you'll get a sense of whether that's something that you enjoy doing. I'll tell you, I've been general counsel now for a while. I'm still really nervous every time I send an email to the board, and I want to make sure there's no typos, and I've attached the attachments and I've copied the right people on it. And so that never goes away. So start to build those muscles a little bit if you get the chance in your org.
So let me follow up on sort of the related topic off some of the things you said, Kathleen. What kind of training did you get that you think really helped you to become a GC? And now that you're in the role, what training didn't you get that you wish you had had?
Yeah, the best training, of course, is real life experience. So when I started at the woman I mentioned earlier, as it was my GC, helped me to, I did get involved with, it just relates, as it relates to the board, started to prepare board materials, attend some committee meetings. I didn't go to the board meetings, but I attended some committee meetings. And so that real life experience is the best experience you can get. So when those opportunities come your way, take advantage of them or step in even a little bit further. Hey, do you want me to circulate those materials to the board? Do you want me to do a first draft of those materials? outside of that, I think Betty touched on networking. ACC is a tremendous resource for in-house counsel. I'll plug it here. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to me directly, but look at the ACC website and consider that. Shep, I know you have a couple of networking groups for folks. That's another way to network with people and understand what it is they're doing, because so much of it today is, what are other companies doing in our space? So having built that network is going to be really important to say, hey, Dave, how are you guys at EverQuote doing this? What are you thinking about on this? Or so much of these things, there's no playbook for, so we're doing it for the first time. So build those networks. So what are the things I didn't get trained for? I think the things I didn't get trained for are sitting in our exec team meeting and having the CTO say, yeah, I just don't agree with you. What do I do then, right? And it's usually the CTO, actually. I just don't agree with you. We're not going to do that.
It's always the CTO.
It's the CTO, right? Like, nope, I don't agree. We're not going to do that. And thinking like, but wait, I made such a persuasive argument and I know I'm right. And he or she or they probably believes that they are correct as well. So I still don't have a great answer for that. You just keep trying to persuade or being influential. So that's the thing I don't have an answer for.
Eddie, Dave, any thoughts on training for people that want to be GCs?
I think, for me, my background, undergrad was in accounting. I worked in public accounting consulting for a while. I thought that was a great, background. So, to the extent you're going to be a business lawyer, I think it's helpful. Even, if you were an English major, to start, if you never took like an accounting for lawyers class, this is my own bias plug because that's what I teach, to kind of learn and pick up that skill set a little bit. I think that's, really helpful training. Most of my training then came from, I think, working in the law firm environment and getting an opportunity to work on deals, sit in, board meetings and things like that. That was certainly helpful. Then, a lot of it's, just getting thrown in the deep end and kind of, figuring out as you go along and recognize that, we're all smart people. We all made it through law school. We can learn it and figure it out. There's no real magic to it. It's just, taking the opportunity and the time to just, practice it and get better at it.
Yeah, I would say that, I started as a corporate lawyer in a firm. And so my universe of knowledge was all about, startups and investment and M&A. Like it wasn't the people part. Right. And the minute I got in-house, it was all about the people, a lot of employment issues, a lot of employment questions, and HR coming to you and saying, what do you think about this? The worst thing is when you have to be part of terminating somebody and advising on that. And how do you do that in a way that preserves dignity and respect, right, for the person? So I would say nobody prepared me for that. And I would, if I were to go back and say, what training should I have gotten? I think it would have been more about like, how do I build my knowledge of interacting with people, almost like HR for dummies, right? So that I could just be more effective in both interactions on the management team level, what you were saying, David, like how do I deal with someone that's, not agreeing with me, right? How do I use that kind of, persuasion to get them to come around, all the way to, some not great practices or culture has to change. How, as the GC, how can I be part of culture shifting and change management, right? So those soft management skills, I think, are some of the things I would say try to get in some other context, right? Whether it's external board work or volunteering for another organization or taking up, wherever you are now, like getting exposure to that, I think is really important, because they don't train you for that in law school, for sure. That's for sure.
So Betty, let me follow up on some of this. And Kathleen alluded to this before when she was talking about general counsel, and you have to know about all these different areas. And today, you know, there's data privacy, there's, you know, security issues, there's employment issues. As a general counsel, you know, at some level, you're responsible for knowing everything, which obviously is completely unrealistic. How much time do you spend or effort do you spend trying to keep up with certain areas and changes in the law? And then how much do you just say, well, I'm not going to learn anything about that. I'm going to rely either on, you know, a junior person in my department or outside counsel. How do you balance all of that as the general counsel, knowing that at any day, you know, the CEO can come in and say, hey, we've got this issue. I need an answer right now.
I mean, I picked the areas that came up the most, right? Where I was being asked for direct advice. So one, it was the things related to, say, at Millennium, right? I interacted a lot with our industry group because there was so much coming from a legislative standpoint, like, oh, there's a legislation that's going to impact your contracts. Like, because you have this clause, all your contracts could be completely void. You know, so it's like, I need to be an expert in whatever consumer law in the health and fitness industry. And so I would, you know, immerse myself in that, really understand it. I even, you know, got involved in policy, right? And testified in a number of hearings because you have to become an expert in that area. Like I said, HR was another one, right? Just knowing just enough across 5 states on employment law so that I could advise our general managers in those other locations so they don't break the law, right? Like that's where I made sure I knew just enough that we were not doing illegal activity. And then there were things that came up from time to time that I would go, you know, privacy law issues, data breach. I forget what firms, Shep, I may have come to you a number of times, like contract litigation. Like I know nothing about litigation and I don't even want to know anything about litigation. So can you help me, right? So I had my firms, external firms, and even friends that were in-house counsel in other places as my advisors for those issues. But I knew my boundaries about, like, I know nothing about, you know, this area. And so I'm always going to go to somebody else. And internally, my CEO, COO, they knew, right, where those boundaries were. So it was never a surprise when I would say, hey, I have to check with outside counsel on that, right? I need to double check that law in that state. Let me come back to you on it. So there's never surprises around it. I don't think anyone expects you to be an expert in everything, but you should be an expert on the things that relate to your business.
Dave, Kathleen, what are your thoughts on how much time, effort you spend sort of keeping up with certain areas? What areas do you, what areas don't you, and how much do you devote to that?
I'll jump in. So there tends to be a lot of cycles around this. So 5 years ago, we were all talking about GDPR, and then 3 years ago, we're all talking about CCPA, and you have to ratchet up really quickly because nobody else in your business is paying any attention to it, and you know that it's coming and you want to get ahead of it. So those were big issues. I would say 24 to 18 months ago, I was spending all my time on COVID and HR policies around COVID and related things like that. I don't spend any time on that anymore, right? I'm sort of like, I'm just going to hear that along the way. We're making judgment calls at this point. I'm not spending too much time on COVID. So some of these things spike, or suddenly you've got a litigation. You become expert in the Telephone Consumer Protection Act because you got sued, and suddenly you're like, okay, I need to understand this. It's really pretty cyclical. But then things like real estate, we used to all have office facilities. We don't all have office facilities anymore. We still have them. And, you know, your lease comes up and you have to dive in and get pretty deep quickly, but it's not something I'm going to spend any time on. I have a lease, I can pick it up and read it, you know, and there aren't emergency lease issues, or there are rarely emergency lease issues. So I don't spend time on that. But I think you've got to have the intellectual curiosity as a general counsel to say, okay, I have this issue on 280G, excessive payment, compensation payments to, certain employees. I need to understand that, so I'm going to dive in on it. We don't have the luxury of saying, I'm not interested, so I'm not going to learn about that. So you've got to dive in on certain things, but it tends to be cyclical. And then the next time a 280G issue comes along, you're like, oh, I remember that. I know enough about it that I can dive in and get familiar with it, even though I'm not expert on it by any means.
Dave, any thoughts on things you keep up on?
Pretty consistent. I think, both those points that Betty and Kathleen made. So I would echo those. Certainly, matters that touch upon, your business on a regular basis. You really need to become an expert in and familiar with. And then in my mind, it's just about, what scales. We're for my company, we're a small legal team. We operate fairly leanly, and we need to be able to scale, and that may be leveraging outside counsel. And then to a certain extent, as you become a frequent flyer in areas of the law, like Betty said, employment law, you start to pick up more and more, and then you start going to outside counsel, less and less, because you've kind of learned it and had some assistance. I think the areas that you continue, or at least I continue to leverage outside counsel in particular is certainly litigation. We're not while I have members of the team that have backgrounds in litigation, we're not practicing litigators on a regular basis. And then the other area is there are areas of law that are just constantly changing at a fairly rapid pace that maybe we don't touch upon on a regular basis. And you really need to have someone that's working and practicing in that field, day in and day out. They really are the subject matter expert. My background in when I was at Bingham, big part of my practice was M&A work. If we're going to do an M&A deal, we will leverage outside counsel for that. I'm not practicing in that area on a regular basis. We do maybe one or two deals a year. I don't know what market terms are these days in a purchase agreement. I don't keep track of that. I'm not doing 50 deals a year. I'm doing 2. There's an area that one, it makes sense to leverage outside counsel. One, just to expand the team, but 2, for that expertise that just doesn't make sense for me to learn and maintain on my own.
So let's talk about, again, internally with the business and knowing the business and knowing the people in the business. You all have talked a lot about dealing with the board and the C-suite, and they're not the only people in the business. And now that you're GC, do you get concerned about losing touch with some of the people that aren't quite at that level? I think all of you, or at least some of you, know Bill Gavovich, who's the general counsel at Primark. He used to, when we were all in person, he would spend 4 hours a month on the floor, folding sweaters, stacking sneakers, doing stuff like that, which I thought was fantastic. It showed he was a real person. He got to meet other people. So let me ask you, Kathleen, since you're just really started the new job, what did you do to get to know people? And again, not just the board, but everybody. And how do you make sure you sort of keep track of that as opposed to, losing sight of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's super important for anyone who's starting a new job, and harder than ever in COVID and remote situations. So if you're in a fully remote org or an organization that's hybrid, where many, many people are outside of the office, it has to be something that you consciously spend time on doing. So here our water cooler tends to be Slack. So I tend to jump in on Slack things. And, if it's our Meows and Woofs channel, which is dogs and cats, like I'll jump in there and tell people that I love their cats. So I think, sorry, let me step back a second. In our role as general counsel, my biggest worry is that somebody who is a new employee who's 6 months out of college hears about something and thinks, ooh, I don't know what to do with that. Do we have a legal department? Is this a legal issue? Boy, do I know the general counsel. I want everyone in the organization, we're small enough that everyone should know, oh yeah, we have a legal department. That woman with a cute dog, my dog is 13, is the general counsel. She seems a little friendly. I can probably pick up the phone and call her, or Slack her, or send her an email. So I think that's part of our biggest role, especially as a new person, just to make sure that people know who I am, that I'm here. It's much harder to do in the COVID world. So find out where your water cooler is, if it's Slack, or if you play in the team, your company's softball team, or whatever it is in the COVID world, to try and get in on that. Part of the, one of the things I did at Car Gurus, my prior employer, find out where the pain points are in your business. What are the hardest things that people have to do? So recruiting is going to be a pain point for all of your businesses today. Spend some time with your recruiting team and understand their pain points and see what you can do to help. Another one in my prior company's business was Car Gurus sells to car dealers, and we had this opportunity to shadow calls with our car dealers. Our new sales team would call a new car dealer and try to get them to subscribe to our service. I would listen to those calls and join them, and it really gives you a sense of, oh boy, their job is hard. So to the extent that you can find out where the pain points are in your business, and you can meet the people who try to address those pain points, it's really helpful. And then you get some empathy, and you can say, hey, that was a really tough call. And hey, I heard you finally landed that customer. How did it go? So spend time with anyone who you can spend time with. The nice thing about our roles is generally, if you call, this is true of anyone who's on this call, if you reach out to somebody by email or Slack or call and say, hey, I want to learn more about your job, they're going to tell you more. So use that, leverage that, and really spend the time on it. But you have to spend time. It doesn't happen by accident. You've really got to invest some time to make it happen.
Dave, Betty, any thoughts on getting to know the business and all the business people, not just the board people, when you become the GC, and that's not maybe your daily focus?
Yeah, so it's funny because I don't know, maybe just our structure was set up this way, but so in my last role at Compass, we were in an office, and when we were in an office, like, I knew everybody. We made we had team lunches, we did outings, or tried to do outings. So there were mechanisms to get to know other people. When we went online because of COVID, we had, and this came out of, I think, Shep, you're the GC group. It was someone's, remember those early days of COVID, everyone was scrambling, trying to figure out, like, oh my God, how do we deal with this and go remote? And someone said, oh, we're having town halls. And I took that back to our CEO. So we started going to weekly, sometimes twice a week town halls. And it actually was more effective to see everybody, hear from everybody. And it was super clear, like, I'm the general counsel, but I was also playing a role, especially once we started to get into, the racial reckoning, George Floyd. There was a sense of vulnerability about what was happening, and seeing this most senior leaders of the organization talk about the personal impact of all of the stuff going on was so meaningful to employees. It mattered to them. It created a different culture and a safe space for them. So, I mean, this is all about, like, going digital, but I have to say that although it was hard, right, for people, especially new employees starting, not understanding how do I build relationships, those town halls really helped. And then I also onboarded everybody about the DEI plan. So I met every new employee because I was doing the DEI onboarding. So it was another way for me to get to know new staff. And then again, this is like all of 2020, we started 2 affinity groups, a Black and a Latino employee affinity group. And again, was part of shaping it with them. I was the executive champion. So I just put myself in positions where I could get to know, right, the staff. At Millennium, again, this was like the fun job where I got to work out. I would work out every day. I had a trainer, so I knew what all the gossip, I took class. Like, I was like, I want to know what's happening, right? So you got to embed yourself in some way, because they can't see you as like what you don't want is for them to see you as the corporate hat, right? That doesn't know anything about what's happening. Like, so I was sort of playing these 2 roles of, I want to be seen as part of the staff, part of the team, but I also knew my role as a executive in the organization, and having that pulse. And I can speak Spanish, so I would make it a point to really go out of my way and talk to the staff in the locker room, which was mostly Spanish speaking Latinos. And I would hear like all the stuff happening. And that's how you start to see like, oh, wow, there's something bubbling here, or we need to change this practice, or here's an opportunity for the general manager, right, to do something different, or celebrate them, right? So I think I love that story of the Primark GC walking the floor and folding, right? Because that is the way you get to know people at a more meaningful level.
Great. So we're running up against it a little bit. I want to get to each of you, a closing statement. Just want to keep it to 2 minutes. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A that I want to get to after that. We'll go reverse order from how I introduce people. So Kathleen, give us your closing statement, your highlights, whatever you want to say in 2 minutes.
I'm going to play off what Betty was just saying. I think with our roles, and again, this is true for everybody in this group here, we have some authority, and with authority comes some responsibility. And you have a platform, and I advise you to use that platform wisely. So find the things that you're passionate about. If you are passionate about making sure that women are advanced and treated fairly in your organization, use that platform. You have the responsibility to do it. If you are passionate about making sure that you treat employees equally, and you want to get involved and make sure that your company does the Human Rights Campaign Equality Index, join that, spend your time on that. But you need to invest your time. It's some authority and some responsibility. So use that.
Great. Dave?
I think I'd probably talk to a little bit about, it's okay, kind of moving from, a layer or two below the GC role, into the GC role. And I think, folks that I've talked to, kind of have questions about, how to make that transition. It's one of those interesting things that you run into a lot where, everyone's looking for experience, but how do you get the experience if you've never had the job? And I know it's cliched, but I really do think it comes down to a lot of networking, and just connecting with folks and making sure that, that you're at least somewhere on their mind, and that they know that you're looking. A lot of it has to do with, just the luck of timing. I know the role that I'm in now just came about from networking and timing. And so I think that those are, kind of really important things to pursue. And then after that, I think it's, really, going back to the comment that Kathleen made earlier about wearing the generalist hat, trying to really build out your skill set to touch upon a number of, functional areas, whether it's on the, doing business development deals, whether it's on HR related, whether it's M&A or, public company, if you, work in a public company, trying to really build your tool set so that when opportunities, come up, you have things that you can speak to in what you've done before. You don't need to have, had the general counsel hat to get the general counsel hat.
Betty, closing statement?
To me, it all comes down to whatever position you're in the organization, what value can you bring to the business today? And I think understanding, where does your business fit in the larger picture? What are some of the strategic issues your management team is dealing with? How can you be of value and of service to that? And it requires going beyond your day job. Right? It might require leaping or stretching, taking on assignments that, you are not in your realm of work. And that is how you're going to learn the business. I've always thought the general counsel role is like the best role to have in an organization because you know everything. You know where all the bodies are hidden. You get to be the fly on the wall, or you get to be the insect on the table, like whatever you call, you're there. And so what better way to learn a business, right? Because you get to see it all, and you have to understand each of the departments and how they intersect. So I say leverage that, like plant yourself, raise your hand for whatever, stretch assignments you can get. I mean, there's networking, but there's also opportunities to do different work. Right? Don't pigeonhole yourself, especially if you're in a really large legal department. Don't pigeonhole yourself to one area. Try to expose yourself to other ones. Rotate.
Great.
And I'm going to jump on that, Betty, hold your manager accountable to that. If you say, hey, I've been doing M&A for 2 years now, and I really want to, work more with the HR team, or can I expand beyond litigation? Like, if you've had that understanding with your manager, hold them accountable to that. You really, it's on you to make sure that happens.
Great. A couple questions in the Q&A here. This one I think is interesting. So it starts off, lawyers are overheard at companies. I don't think they mean by accident. I mean, lawyers are talking a lot. I think it's been answered in some ways during the discussion, but what are the best ways that a lawyer or legal team can demonstrate value to the business?
I think they might mean overhead, not overheard, but
Overhead. I was like, what is that? Right, we're a cost center. We are a cost center, right?
Yeah.
So figure out what matters to your business, right? Look at your KPIs, your OKRs, whatever alphabet soup you call it at your business. That's what your management team has committed to doing. You need to tie yourself to that. So if it's, where one of ours is SMB, small and medium businesses. So figure out a way to tie into small and medium businesses. If you're working in a litigation matter that is just cost, right? Seemingly cost, reach out to the teams, your product teams, your other teams that you're involved with, and say, wait, how can we prevent this in the future? How can we do this better in the future? Understand the products, start to move into that product side. That's incumbent on you to figure out the ways to do that. It's really easy if you're on the revenue side, right? If you're the person who closes deals for your company, great, you close deals and you can show, hey, look, I care, I work all through the end of the quarter just the same as you do, I'm on your team. If you're not on that side, it's harder to do, but it's on you to figure out what matters to your company and then start to show that you're contributing to that.
So one other question here. So were you shaping your career along the way with the goal to be a GC, or was it your path more organic than that? For those wondering if GC is the right role, anything you miss about a non-exec level in-house role?
I never had a non-exec level in-house role, so I don't know, but it was not, I wanted to be a venture capitalist. Like I was the last person in my class to leave at the time, Palmer and Dodge or Edwards Wildman. I held out for as long as I could. And I was like, I don't think I want to be a partner in a firm, but I want to go into venture capital. But it's really hard to go from lawyer, right, to VC. So the opportunity to go in-house came along, and it was at a company that I really, really liked. So I went. So I stayed in the law longer than I ever thought I would have. And again, it's a really great role to be in, right? Especially for an organization you love, because you could be part of strategy, you could be part, of growing that business. But I'm not a lawyer anymore, as you know. I'm now in finance, heading a social impact fund.
So Dave, Kathleen, were you guys, at what point were you thinking about being a GC? Did you set things up a certain way? Did you gear towards that? What'd you do? And is there anything you missed? Yeah.
Were you strategic? I was not strategic about it.
I was. I mean, I'll say that, it was, I had the benefit of working with some great GCs in my accounting days, and kind of at that point in time, said like, hey, I like what those, folks are doing in the roles that they play in the organizations that they're in. So I had, I guess, maybe some early exposure to some, strong GCs, and that kind of, fostered an interest on my part. So I'd say a lot of my career was kind of focused in moving in that direction from early on. In terms of the, missing about a non, exec, in-house role. I think it's just a question of, how much, do you, welcome or not welcome the spotlight of being the one that's ultimately, responsible. And there's obviously, if something goes wrong, that's not great. But at the same time, if things are going well, it is great. So it's a question of, do you, just personality, where do you fit in? Some people that fits well with their personality. Some people, maybe it doesn't. And the ups and downs, the roller coaster ride that you're on, you'd prefer to have something a little more, steady state. Even if you prefer for steady state, doesn't mean you wouldn't be, outstanding at the other, but you may just, find just for your own personality, it's not a great fit.
Thanks. It's 1:00, panelists. Thank you so much. This has been great. Really appreciate all your insights. For those of you on here, if you have other questions, and I didn't get to some of the Q&A, I'll try to get them back to you. Feel free to send me an email, try to get you responses. But go out there and be future GCs. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Shep.
Bye.
Bye.